Well, welcome back. If you just finished watching chapter 12, we're now going to move into chapter 13. We are in the chapters having to do with the leading function. In chapter 11 we talked about individual behavior and that sort of thing, and how it can affect a person's actions and their judgment. In chapter 12 we talked about motivation. So in chapter 13, we're going to talk about groups and teams. Now let me kind of set the stage here with that conversation. First of all, are groups better than teams, or teams better than groups? The answer to that is no. In an organizational structure, some organizations are structured in a team concept. You have different teams that perform, and you have a team leader. And that's the way they organize their structure, at least a part of their organizational structure. Other companies have line and staff, different things like this, and they're organized in groups. It's a group organizational structure, not a team organizational structure. So, is one better than the other? Well, yes, probably for a particular situation. But you just can't say that teams are better or groups are better. It's just you're going to utilize whatever it is that works best as far as your organizational structure is, and your particular area, your particular store, your particular department. Okay? So let's look at chapter 13, groups and teams. All right. Are a group of people and a team of people the same thing? No, normally groups, as it relates to business, groups are led by management. Teams are more self-directed. Now, if you look at your chapter 13 handout, the very first part of that handout talks about what a group is and what a team is. I think I know those. I'm going to probably ask you a question on test number 3, and of course this is the last chapter before we do test 3. I'm probably going to ask you a question like, define group, define team, and the difference between the two. What is a group? What is a team? And what's the difference between the two? Okay, let's just play with that definition for a minute. A group is a collection of people performing as individuals. The class that we would be in right now would be a group. If we were together right now in our Business 210 class, we would be together as a group. A great group, a wonderful group. Like I said, there's not a distinction good and bad. We have a wonderful group in Business 210. But it's a collection of people performing as individuals. You do things as individuals in our Business 210 group. We do discussions individually with different ones. We test with different, individually, that sort of thing. 2 or more freely interacting individuals who share collective norms, you're in Business 210, share collective goals, getting out of Business 210 with a real good grade, and have a common identity, members of Business 210. You're not a crowd, you are a group. You are a group of individuals that have, again, collective norms, shared collective goals, and have a common identity. You're working, though, as individuals. Now, a team is a collection of people with a common commitment. In a team, everybody is committed to the same goal. Small group of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Okay, that's a lot of words, and I don't use a lot of athletic examples, but this would be a great one. A football, it is not a football group. It is a football team. In the game of football, you don't want a group. Even if they're a really nice, good group, you don't want two or more freely interacting individuals who are performing as individuals. They've got to perform together as a team. A small group with complementary skills. You've got the guards, you have the tackles, you have the receivers, you have the quarterback, and on defense you have defensive. Everybody has a particular skill. They're committed to a common purpose, win the ball game. They're committed to a common performance goals. Each of them has performance goals to which they have to reach, an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. The quarterback, regardless of how good the quarterback is, if they have no time to throw the ball, they're not going to be effective. The running back, no matter how good that running back is, if the people have their hands on him before he hardly gets the ball in his hands, he's not going to be effective. So a team is where the key things here with the team: complementary skills, common purpose, mutually accountable. That's my lights went out. I got two still on you. Okay. So I would know what a group is. I know what a team is. I know the difference between the two. Now he talks about now he's going to talk some about teams. He's going to talk some about groups. So let's talk a little bit about groups. There's two kinds of groups within companies. There's the formal groups, and there's the informal groups. If you have an organizational structure, and this is the CEO. These are vice presidents. You move down the organizational structure this way. This would be a formal group. Each one of these have goals to accomplish and this sort of thing. They're all within the structure of the organization. That would be a formal group. Now, I don't want to confuse you, but if you get down here at some level, and let's say at this level, they have team 1, team 2, team 3, and team 4, and they meet the definition of a team. That means that within this organizational structure, you have both groups and you have teams, because you have two different types of organizational structures. Okay, don't want to get too crazy on that. Then you have within any organization, not only do you have formal groups, you have informal groups. Informal groups are groups that just get together. Just enjoy each other's interaction. Remember Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and you talk about social needs. Just the opportunity for social interaction and that sort of thing. That's what an informal group would be. It's not a part of the formal organizational structure. It's simply an informal group that just gets together for informal ideas. I think I put in here for friendship, things like that. Okay. Remember that teams are more self-managed, whereas groups are more management-managed. 5 stages of group and team development. Now we talked at first about groups and then teams, then we talked about formal and informal groups. Now he says, let's talk about the 5 stages that both of them go through, groups and teams. There's kind of 5 stages of development that groups and teams go through. And I'll put them down here on your handout for you. And let me go through them kind of quickly. How does a group or team start? You form it. So the first stage of group or team development you have to form the group, or you form the team. Now you see that second one, isn't that an interesting thing? Storming. Just because you put a group or a team together, does that mean they're going to work very well the first day? No. Does that mean you're going to have some personality? Remember the values and attitudes and stuff we talked about a few chapters ago? Is there going to be some jockeying for position within that group or within that team? Somebody wants the leadership, somebody, so they're going to kind of getting to know each other, kind of bumping heads, just kind of getting that storming period. Then norming. Things start settling down. People start looking to work together, they know each other, that type of thing. After they settle down, they get to a normal situation, then they can start performing. And then the 5th stage is adjourning. Now, if it's a group, like within an organizational structure, they may stay together for a long time. But if you're putting together something, a team or something together for maybe a specific purpose or whatever, that team, or I guess it could even be a group, performs for a certain period of time, and then they adjourn. So I'd be familiar with the 5 stages as far as group or team development: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Okay. Now the next part of this handout is, it's very self-explanatory. So he talks about building effective teams. And I think we could also say building effective groups. What do you have to have an effective team? Or what do you have to have an effective group? Okay, let me just sit here for a minute and let's just look. Almost fell off. Let's just look at those things and see if this may, I mean, it's very self-explanatory, so I'm not going to take much time with it. I just want to make sure, because I want us to be familiar with the things that you need to have to build an effective team or a group. Number 1, do you have to have cooperation? Check, got it. Number 2, do you have to have trust? Check. If people don't want to cooperate and people don't trust each other, you're not going to have an effective team or an effective group. Backside of this handout as I'm looking at it. What are some other things? Should you have performance goals and feedback? If you don't have performance goals, you don't know where you're going and what you're trying to do, and you're not going to know how well you're doing it if you don't get feedback. So you have to have that. Motivation and mutual accountability. Okay. In both a group or a team, you've got to have motivation. Mutual accountability is something that's pretty specific to a team. So if you're going to have an effective team, you're going to have mutual accountability. Can the size of the team affect the team, or can the size of the group affect the group? Should it be large? Should it be small? He talks about social loafing. I threw that in here, where some people kind of let the other folks carry the load and everything. So the size of a group can affect, a group needs to be large enough to accomplish what it's going to accomplish, or a team, but it doesn't need to be too large. So, and different teams and different groups are going to be different sizes, because that for that particular goal that they're trying to accomplish or whatever, there's a certain size that works. Roles. Within groups or within teams, are different people going to play different roles? Yes. Norms. Now again, this is more for teams and groups, but it can be for both. Is that team going to set up certain norms by which the employees are expected to operate or behave? The answer is yes. Cohesiveness. Do you need to have a sticking togetherness? I don't think that's a word, but you understand what I'm saying. And then what you don't want is groupthink, when peer pressure discourages thinking outside the box, an unwillingness to consider alternatives. Okay, so what have we said in this kind of in a hurry? We said, okay, if you're going to have an effective team, and for the most part this happens with a lot of these with groups, but I'll just go within a team. What's going to make a high performance effective team? You got to have cooperation. You got to have trust. You've got to have performance goals and feedback on how you're doing. You've got to have motivation, that's chapter 12, and you've got to have mutual accountability. Everybody's in this game together if you're a team. The size of your team affects your performance, so you've got to have the right size, whatever that happens to be. Each person's going to play a different role, and they don't need to be playing your role, they need to be playing their role. And teams are going to establish certain norms. This is the expected behavior within that team. That's not outside doing it, that the team establishes its own norms. Okay. Then teams have to be cohesive, and you don't want to have groupthink. Okay. Managing conflict. I want you to be familiar with, by the way, I want you to be familiar with those things that make a team effective. And I want you to be familiar with groupthink, the one thing that doesn't make teams effective. Now let's talk about conflict. You ever gotten involved in any conflict? Hope it wasn't too bad. But in a business situation, generally speaking, do you want conflict? Answer is no. But could there be some situations where a little bit of conflict might be helpful? The answer to that is it really could be. Sometimes constructive conflict can be beneficial. if a company gets into, or a department gets in too deep of a rut, they've dug a 6-foot rut that they can't get out of. They're just marching along, really not giving any thought to anything. It's just the way we've always done it. Well, you might need to stir that up a little bit. So sometimes constructive conflict is good. Negative conflict never is. So just managing conflict. I'd like you to be familiar with what conflict is. A process in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party. Also be familiar with conflict, generally speaking, certainly negative conflict you don't want. But sometimes a manager may want to stir up a little bit of constructive conflict to get people back at a higher level of performance. All right? How do you stimulate constructive conflict? I put this on our handout as well. And what can you do to kind of stir things up in a good sort of way? Now let's look at them. Competition among employees. That's a good way. Now you've got to set the rules. You've got to make sure everybody plays by the rules. You've got to have all that lined out correctly. But a little bit of competition can stir up the status quo. So one of the things you can do for some constructive conflict is competition. Change the organizational culture or procedures. Now changing organizational culture is very hard. I'd say that CenturyLink over the last 20 years, their organizational culture has changed quite a bit because they've gone from a small regional company to a worldwide company. As a result of that, have maybe things changed in the way things and all are done within the company? Probably so. But if you change up culture or if you change up procedures, the way things are done, we've always done it that way. But that doesn't make it best. So maybe it's time to have, I was looking for me a supervisor here, maybe it's time to have some competition within your area. Or sometimes maybe you might want to do something like change some procedures and that type of thing. Time out. Had an alarm set because I've got to go to a phone meeting here in just a few minutes, and I didn't want to be late for that. Which also tells me we're getting close to the end of chapter 13. What else can you do to stimulate constructive, good conflict? Bring outsiders in for new perspectives. It's great to hire from within. It's great to hire, but sometimes bringing somebody from the outside at the management level can kind of help bring in new ideas. You know, and if sometimes when you have some turnover in your department, instead of bringing somebody else in from another department, bring them in from the outside. That can be helpful. Use program conflict. There are certain things that you can do to kind of stir up conflict in a good way. And I put one down here, devil's advocate. Did you ever play devil's advocate? The idea there is whatever somebody comes up with, you challenge it. If they say it's white, you say it's black. If they say it's this, you say it's that. If they say this is going to be really great, take the other side of it. That's playing the devil's advocate. What does that do? Well, it certainly stirs things up, but it makes people really think through things. Are we doing it the right way? Is there a better way to do it? That type of thing. So, constructive, negative conflict you don't want. And you want to do the things that through whatever means that you need to do as a supervisor, not to have negative conflict. But constructive conflict sometimes is helpful. And we talked about some of the ways that you can actually bring about constructive conflict. That pretty much is the things that we need to know or be, obviously, how to stimulate constructive conflict would be be familiar with the item. I think the only no item we had in chapter 13 are groups and teams. I want you to know what a group is, know what a team is, and I want you to know the difference between the two. Okay, we have done chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. We just finished chapter 13. These are the chapters that's going to be on test number 3. So once we get past these chapters, I'll be giving you test number 3 online, of course, where you will get the test, have a certain period of time in which you can take it, and a certain time limit to be able to take that test. So we have made it through. The chapters for test number 3, and so we're gonna sign off at this point. I'm getting ready to go to my meeting that I have to go to, and I'll be back later at some point. Whether I'll be recording these right now or a little bit later on. Obviously, we've got chapters 14, 15, and 16, and I'll certainly have those out to you before long. So as Professor Pierce always wants my break, let me do an official thank you for chapter 13. We're done. Thank you. Goodbye.